Okay, we'll start with this. You might have heard already that reigning WBC champion Jermall Charlo, who recently had his fight canceled with Maciej due to a reported back injury, he very recently sat down with Brian Custer on the Last Stand podcast and communicated that he'd be willing to move back down to junior middleweight for Terrence Crawford.
To which Terrence Crawford replied,
"You're coming down to fight me at 154 pounds, bro. I know you would. I believe you too. But your brother's still a pussy."
Jermall's brother Jermell, who very recently became this division's undisputed champion.
Terrence Crawford has made it crystal clear. He has declared that he aims to become a three-weight undisputed world champion. Once I beat Errol Spence, if Jermell Charlo don't move up, I'm coming for him. I've got two people on my hit list. Spence first, and then Jermell.
And in an ideal world, that would be the pecking order. In an ideal world, that's what would happen.
But things are seldom ever ideal in the sport of boxing. If we are to address such a proposition where Terrence beats Errol Spence Jr., becomes the welterweight division's undisputed champion, and subsequently moves up in weight thereafter, we don't know that Jermell is still going to be there. Right now, that guy's drowning in mandatories.
Bakram Murtazaliev by way of the IBF.
Tim Tszyu by way of the WBO, the very statuesque Towering Inferno, Sebastian Fundoria by way of the WBC. I just don't get the sense that Jermell Charlo is going to stick around and fight all of these guys to hang on to all of those belts. So the idea that Terrence might get to fight for undisputed for a third time against Jermell may not even have all the belts for them
by the time Spence versus Crawford happens.
If it happens and Crawford wins. Thereafter, we don't know that Jermell Charlo's still going to be in possession of all the belts for a fight between him and Terrence to be an undisputed title fight.
Listen, I wouldn't be surprised if Terrence don't get either Charlo in the ring.
Jermell Charlo for whatever belts he's still in possession of, and Jermall for none of his. If he were to move down to 154 pounds to fight Terrence Crawford, what fucking title would it be for?
He's just talking shit.
Fucking shit. Like he did back in 2020 when he said he'd move up in weight to knock out David Benavidez. Do you remember that? Because that's what got the ball rolling. That's how we got here. This whole Charlo versus Benavidez.
Charlo started it in March of 2020 when he said he'd move up in weight and knock out that guy.
He's been rationalizing reasons not to do it, not follow up on his word ever since. I don't believe for a second he's going to move down to junior middle to take on Terrence Crawford.
It's all bullshit.
Fucking bullshit. Spare me your hypothetical anecdotes about the hypothetical matchup when everything about these PBC guys is hypothetical. Most of the time, with most of their fighters, you end up talking about fights that ain't happening, ain't about to happen, in all likelihood will never happen.
It's all bullshit.
How many hypothetical matchups has Gervonta Davis won the last 4 or 5 years? Jermall Charlo.
It's all bullshit.
Already turned down a multi-million-dollar offer to unify titles right there at middleweight. He wouldn't have had to have gone anywhere. Right there at middleweight, he turned down a multi-million-dollar offer to unify titles with Demetrius Andrade, but we're supposed to believe he's going to cut down to 154, a weight he hasn't made in, I don't know, 4, maybe 5 years, to fight Terrence Crawford for no belt at all.
Well, even if I did believe he'd do it, that still makes him a chicken shit.
Even if I thought that Jermall Charlo meant business, that he's serious, and he's willing to move down and wait for a Terrence Crawford fight, that still makes him a chicken shit. Makes him a chicken shit because he's the one that was bumping his gums in 2020, saying he'd move up and wait and take on David Benavidez. He's been rationalizing reasons not to do it ever since. He didn't want to unify titles with a man his own size in Demetrius Andrade at his own weight, but he's willing to go to 54 for a welterweight that's moving up in weight in what would be his 4th division, his 4th weight class.
Even if that were true, that still makes him a chicken shit.
This guy's got one of the most pointless careers in professional boxing.
One of the more ignominious reigns as a champion.
Certainly one of the more sparse schedules of activity for a professional boxer. I'm starting to wonder if this guy's going to fight this year at all. We know that the fight with Maciej got called off due to a reported back injury. back injury that didn't keep
him from slamming drinks down at the bar with his buddy. Getting wasted. Jermall Charlo
is a waste of space. In many ways, discussing his career is a waste of time, though I only do so because it needs to be said at times. This is not a guy you can take at his word.
This guy's always threatening somebody.
I view Jermall Charlo and Jermell Charlo as being two very distinctly different individuals with two very distinctly different careers and two very distinctly different characters. I view Jermall as a guy who's threatening somebody every other day, never follows up on his word. In many ways, he's a man-child. This guy's...
You never know it based on how he behaves, but he's 32 fucking years old.
With all the tendencies and instability of an emotionally hormone-driven teenager.
Certainly got a teenager's temperament.
He's not gonna move down and fight Terrence Crawford. He's not gonna do a goddamn fucking thing.
He ain't gonna do shit.
He's gonna continue to bump his gums, continue to pour peroxide into his hair until it ultimately seeps into his brain.
And he turns into a vegetable.
All of this is much ado about nothing.
Well, when we were out in Miami, he told the newspapers out there and myself that Dillian Whyte can get it. So is that someone on your radar?
I've got no problem with that. You know, Dillian, contrary to what happened, what he thought was going to happen working with us, I'm sure I know he lost the fight, but other than that, he had a decent experience. We did everything as we said we'd do. Why not? That's a great fight. You'd like to see that. I'd like to see it. And it's a good yardstick.
Will you be making an offer to Team Whyte?
I'll be speaking to them. I honestly think him and Joshua. I think Joshua is made for it.
I think Frank's running out of ideas. That's what I think. We know that post-fight, after stopping Trevor Bryan, then unbeaten Trevor Bryan, Daniel Dubois and his trainer Shane McGuigan, they named Dillian Whyte as a fighter they'd like to face next, following his win over Trevor Bryan.
Frank's keen on doing the fight.
He has been for at least the last 2.5 years, maybe a little longer than that. This isn't the first time we've seen Frank Warren express enthusiasm towards making that fight. And if I'm being honest, as a boxing fan, I wouldn't mind seeing that fight. I think it's an intriguing fight where either man stands a legitimate chance because Daniel didn't look world-class with Trevor Bryan.
I had him winning every round.
He obviously won. He stopped Trevor Bryan. He did, but there was something hesitant about Daniel Dubois in that fight. Something tentative. I expected him to look better. A part of me expected Daniel to dispatch Trevor Bryan in the first 2 rounds.
I can't put my finger on it, but I wasn't impressed with Daniel.
When it comes to Dillian, well, this is the most opportune time to fight him. When he's coming off yet another knockout loss, the third in his career to Tyson Fury.
Knocked out by Anthony Joshua, knocked out by Alexander Povetkin.
Knocked out more recently by Tyson Fury, though you will notice the running theme with all of those fights and all of those knockouts. Every single one of those guys,
every single one of them, when they fought Dillian, was a more proven fighter than Daniel is now.
Oh, granted that Anthony Joshua wasn't yet a champion when he fought Dillian. He was an unbeaten up-and-comer. They both were. But don't forget about Anthony Joshua's pedigree, his amateur pedigree. This was an Olympic upstart, an Olympic gold medalist, as was Alexander Povetkin, who was faded, yes.
Yeah, he was faded, but even as a faded fighter, he exhibited more variety in his punches and more cunning than Daniel Dubois.
And he, like Anthony Joshua, was an Olympic upstart, an Olympic gold medalist. He comes from that kind of background, that kind of amateur pedigree. Tyson Fury, need I say more?
Come on.
Daniel Dubois is no Tyson Fury, and that's what makes the fight intriguing. That Dillian Whyte is more battle-tested at world level than Daniel Dubois is, but this is a very vulnerable Dillian Whyte we're talking about, a Dillian Whyte that's coming off the third knockout loss of his career. So Daniel, he does have an out if he hits the gas. So Daniel's fundamental flaws as a fighter, they give Dillian Whyte an out.
Yeah.
You know, Daniel's got a good jab, but he really don't keep his head off center.
He doesn't look like a guy that's all that hard to hit.
I'd be lying to you if I said that he's shown significant improvement since the loss to Joe Joyce. He hasn't shown significant improvement. Not yet.
I don't know if he will. I just know that he hasn't. Not for me.
Not yet. So Frank is right to assume that it's an intriguing fight, that it's a fight that the fight fans could go for, but
he might be barking up the wrong tree.
I've said it before in passing, and I will say it here and now, yet again. I get the sense that if Dillian Whyte wanted to change his decorum, that if moving forward he wasn't going to do more business with Matchroom, he was going to go somewhere else, I get the sense that Dillian would sooner end up at Sky Sports, boxing under the Boxer banner, than BT because Sky is a bigger platform than BT. They've got more money to play than BT. And
They seem to be willing to pay to play.
they're signing all these blue chip prospects, these amateur standouts, Carolyn Dubois.
Warren Price, Karis Ardingstall.
At a time where a lot of people felt they'd end up at Matchroom. They ended up on Sky Sports. They ended up on Boxer. They signed Frazier Clark. They signed Ben Whitaker. They very recently signed a former champion in Joseph Parker to a long-term deal. Michael Hunter to a multi-fight deal.
They seem to be willing to pay to play.
You know, part of me felt, ahead of that Tyson Fury fight, that if Dillian Whyte would have pulled off one of the biggest upsets in postmodern boxing, it wasn't a guarantee that he would take that green belt back to Matchroom. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that he would continue doing business with Eddie. A part of me felt, in the back of my mind, that he'd see what that green belt was worth to Sky Sports. He'd shop himself around because he's done it before.
And it's not like Ben Shalom and Adam Smith reversed the poaching fighters.
They poached April Hunter. They poached Savannah Marshall. Joseph Parker was supposed to be in the middle of negotiations for a Joe Joyce fight, but look at where he ended up.
That didn't happen on its own. They had to have been communicating.
Dillian Whyte moving forward under a different promotional banner isn't a far-fetched proposition. Now, continuing to work with Frank Warren, Queensbury, BT Sport, that seems a little bit far-fetched, but that Dillian could change his decorum, no, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility, because if he goes back to Matchroom, who does he fight? Derek Chisora for a third time?
Eddie Hearn has said he could be open to Dillian Whyte versus Derek Chisora 3.
That's a fight he's open to, but is Dillian? Eddie Hearn was quoted as saying, that's not a fight I'm looking at the moment, but if he beats Kubrat Pulev, why not do number 3? 2 of the best heavyweight fights I've seen. 3 would also be a cracker.
I don't know that the fight fans in the UK want to see a trilogy.
I'm not saying outright I'm expecting Dillian to leave Matchroom. What I am saying is that if he did, it wouldn't surprise me, because the people over there at Sky Sports and Boxer,
They're willing to pay to play, and they're looking to beef up their stable.
Anthony Joshua decided to leave the Sky Sports platform behind. He's gone all in with DAZN. I'm sure that Ben Shalom and Adam Smith would love to stick it to Eddie Hearn and stick it to Matchroom by poaching the likes of Dillian Whyte. I'm sure they'd be happy to have him. For Christ's sake, Huey Fury is one of their flagship fighters.
Watching that guy fight's like watching paint dry.
You have money to bring over Huey Fury. You have money for Michael Hunter. You have money to give Joseph Parker, but you ain't got no money for the man that beat him, Dillian Whyte? I beg to differ. I think the people at Sky Sports would love to have Dillian Whyte, and in the back of my mind, I feel like it's a genuine possibility.
At least more than Whyte versus Dubois.
Don't misunderstand me. I like that fight. I wouldn't mind seeing it. Dillian Whyte versus Daniel Dubois makes sense. Daniel Dubois got something to prove, and Dillian Whyte needs to rebound.
But I don't know if it happens. I'd sooner expect Dillian to end up on the Sky Sports Boxer side of things.
And finally, in reference to this past weekend super middleweight contest between Edgar Berlanga and Romer Angulo, Edgar Berlanga himself stated, "I reacted poorly and take full responsibility. Moving forward, I am going to be more mindful and encouraging in my behavior. Once again, I do apologize, and what he's apologizing for is momentarily..."
He bit Romer Angulo.
He tried to. It was either Joe Tessitore or Mark Kriegel who was really up in arms about it, really upset.
He wasn't penalized at all for it. Wasn't deducted a point. Nothing.
Rick Mirrigan chimed in on Edgar Berlanga's performance and stated, "Tough to watch. Berlanga is young and he has plenty of time, but not a main event fighter yet to carry a promotion, and too much pressure on him to be great now, and he will get there when he gets there, but a ways to go. The bite just compounds things. Where do you go from here?"
Rick handles the careers of several fighters, Jose Ramirez among them.
It's a valid question, a legitimate one. Where does Edgar go from here? Well, there seem to be preliminary talks for a Jesse Hart fight.
It's not the first time that idea has been entertained.
Edgar himself responded to that idea by saying, "If the money's right, we make it
You
happen."
hear this guy? If the money's right.
Not yet a world champion, not even the mandatory for one, and he's already starting with the "if the money is right" stuff. Jesse Hart has been mentioned as a potential opponent for Edgar Berlanga before each of the undefeated super middleweight's last 2 fights. Berlanga's handlers have yet to agree to that bout, but Berlanga indicated after beating Alexis Angulo by unanimous decision early Sunday morning that he would be willing to fight Hart next. Brooklyn's Berlanga replied, whoever, when asked specifically about boxing Philadelphia's Hart later on this year. You know, whoever's on the list, Berlanga told a group of reporters. You know what I'm saying? If the money's right and everything's good, we make it happen. The 25-year-old Berlanga suggested that his next fight could take place in Puerto Rico.
You know he's not with Andre Rosier anymore.
Berlanga prepared in Puerto Rico for the Angulo bout with his new head trainer, Juan de Leon, but he has not fought on the island since he turned pro in April of 2016. I'm looking forward to fighting in December, Berlanga said. I don't know if it's going to be here or in Puerto Rico, but, I'm going to speak to Top Rank and I'm going to try to, get a fight in Puerto Rico.
And stinking out the Hulu Theater, maybe it's time they give it some fresh air.
Too much promotion went into this fighter too fast. So fast that his development as a fighter hasn't caught up to it.
His reputation exceeded his abilities.
His buzz. Berlanga's bout with Rolls helped draw a capacity crowd of 5,158 people to Madison Square Garden's Hulu Theater almost 3 months ago. His win against Angulo took place the night before the 65th annual Puerto Rican Day Parade in Manhattan, but the event Saturday night wasn't sold out. The announced attendance for Berlanga versus Angulo was 4,357 people.
His star is dimming.
Word is spreading that he's not all he was made out to be, that too much was made of those early knockouts he amassed earlier in his career, and you just don't learn much from those kinds of situations. You don't learn much when you send the guy home early. You don't get any rounds in the bank. You don't get to work on things. It really does feel like too much was made of those knockouts. Too much promotion went into Edgar Berlanga as a fighter, perhaps more than he needed at the time because his development as a fighter hasn't caught up to his buzz. And now he's suffering for it. Suffering in front of a lot of people.
I don't think he beat Alexis Angulo.
I don't. He spent most of that fight retreating, not mounting anything semblant of effective aggression and offense. It felt more like he was just fighting Angulo off most of the time. I find it hard to recall a photo finish punch, a significant punch that Edgar landed throughout the entirety of that fight, as the entirety of that fight, in my recollection of it, was Romer Angulo walking a very nervous Edgar Berlanga down.
Now they want to match him against Jesse.
For a puncher who's going through an identity crisis, that is not ideal matchmaking. Jesse Hart stands a legitimate chance of winning that fight.
Edgar and his team stand a legitimate chance of avoiding it.
Edgar's head trainer knows what he's got. He can't feel good about that performance.
Well, not with the way he was shouting at him in the corner in the Angulo fight.
Edgar Berlanga seems like just another fighter that is on borrowed time.